This is Twisted Passages with award-winning author Marie Sutro. Now, let's take a deep dive into the dark world of psychological thrillers and meet the authors who created them.
Hello, and welcome to Twisted Passages. I'm your host, Marie Sutro, and today we'll be talking to critically acclaimed author John Fram about his new release, No Road Home. Welcome, John.
Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you for being here. I am so excited to chat with you about this book. Before we jump in, before we even get into the parallels folks have made between you and Stephen King and how apt those are, I would like you to start us off with just a quick overview about the book.
So I've been calling it a gothic thriller. It's set in the great state of Texas, my home state, for all of its many faults. And it's about a young father named Toby who has been raising his son, Luca, sort of a hand-to-mouth existence. They've been very, very poor for pretty much all of Luca's life, living out in Los Angeles. And while they're out there, Toby has recently met and married in a sort of whirlwind romance this girl who is the heiress of a TV preacher's fortune. She comes from a family that's very, very successful from this sort of fire and brimstone TV prophet, which obviously Toby is a little apprehensive about. He's not an idiot, but Alyssa has always promised him, like, my family is too rich to be bigoted. They don't actually believe any of this stuff. They just are doing it for a show. And Toby has his misgivings about this, but it's a successful, like, it's a future for his son. So he goes along with it. At the start of the book, they are going to meet the family for the first time, Toby, Luca, and his new wife. They get to the compound, and very quickly Toby realizes that his wife has not been entirely honest and that these people are very much dangerous people. They've got something up their sleeve, especially for Luca. But the problem is Luca's a very sensitive, sweet kid. He's probably gay, and that does not fly with how the family wants him to be. But before Toby can get out of there, there's a big rainstorm, cuts off the roads, cuts off the internet, and the family patriarch is found murdered on the roof of the house. And so if Toby wants to get his kid out of here, he's going to need to figure out who killed him before the family can pin it on him.
The perfect setup for a compelling locked door mystery. Oh, and you're right. It is Gothic, so there might be a little weather involved too.
Yes. Yes. And maybe a ghost or two.
And maybe a ghost or two in true Gothic fashion. You just mentioned the setting. I'm chomping at the bit to get into the characters, but let's start with that setting. This compound that the family has is absolutely beautiful, but like many beautiful things, there's an undercurrent of something dark running through it.
Yes.
How did you choose that setting? You said you're a native of Texas. The way that you described it, the things that you did to it, how did that all come together in your mind?
Texas is such a bizarre state. I mean, like, there are plenty of places that have like these sort of rich compound enclaves, where wealthy people live. But Texas is weird because it's just so much open space. And then you'll stumble across this like gated community, this gated house estate, and you're like, who the hell lives there? Like, it'll be in the middle of nowhere. And I remember as a kid, there was this girl in our church, and like, I never really was close to her, but she invited me and a bunch of people over for like kind of a sleepover movie night thing. Very chaste and, Christian, but it was just sweet. It was like, cool. We're like 30 people are going to go to her house. I remember even thinking, I was like, God, a lot of people got invited. I wonder how, like, I couldn't fit 30 people in my house. And we're like winding the corner through these random country roads. My dad's driving me, and we come across this just like mansion in the middle of nowhere. I mean, like, massive, massive house. And I remember looking at it and just being like, yo, what the hell? Like, how did this happen? Like, A, why would you live out here if you have this kind of money? But B, like, just the weirdness of that always stuck with me. The way that these big open countrysides can hold like huge estates. And then once I got there, I was like, well, God, like, if you have all this privacy and all this money, like, you could probably get up to some pretty bad stuff here.
You could. And that then gives us a great segue for the characters who are inhabiting this compound. Um, Obviously, your main character, Toby, is an amazing protagonist. He's very complex, and his son is just the sweetest thing. Like, I wanted to take him home the whole time.
Yeah.
He's adorable. But some of the other characters are, let's just say, interestingly complex.
Yes.
They're strong in their own ways. And a lot of that potentially is rooted in this almost messianic conviction that comes from the patriarch of the family who started this televangelism, right? That concept of one person starting it and really creating wealth for a family, how did that come through to you? And what did you kind of want to say about that?
I think something that interested me with this one. So the working title was actually His Dark Orbit. And I was really interested in the concept of the way that stuff repeats in families over and over, right? Because that was something where, obviously, I'm not like old or anything, but when you get into your 30s, you do start to get a little bit of perspective on stuff, right? And you're able to see, thankfully, none of this happened in my family that I know of, but you see it in other people's families. They'll tell you stories or just you observe stuff and you're like, geez, like this crap started here and it's just kept going through generation after generation. And so on the one hand, I was interested in the way that wealth can just go through families. Like that's something that I think as a society we're always kind of dealing with, but also B, the way that along with that money can come a lot of damage and some scars. And I was like, so the concept of inheritance became really tied up in the book for sure.
That concept, some people call them generational curses, these
Exactly.
things that repeat over time. One of the things that you got into, and again, this book is just so mind-blowing. It is so powerful on so many levels. Not only did you give us a great mystery, you gave us phenomenal suspense, epic, thrilling moments, but you gave us so much to think about in ourselves and in our own world. And again, on that issue of perhaps generational curses or however you want to label them, some might say sins of the father are revisited upon the children. There was a beautiful passage, and I will not repeat it here because I want everyone to discover it for themselves. But there is one passage where you talk about parents accruing debt that their children then have to pay. Could you explain what you meant by that?
Yeah, it's something that I had noticed in myself and in my friends. You know, I grew up gay in a small town in Texas, right? And like very conservative Christian place. And, you know, my family did the best they could. They've come a long way, but it was just, you know, it was a different time and they didn't always say the best stuff about it, or my family wasn't always super supportive of it. And even before you realize you're gay, the world around you has already given you a lot of baggage about what that means. And so I was really interested in, I was interested in the way that Toby is aware the amount of damage that is going to pile up for Luca, his son. Whether the kid turns out to be gay or trans or just a really sweet, sensitive kid, like he is going to absorb so much BS. And so Toby wants so badly to insulate him from that as long as he can. And I think that what interests me is like, this is a paradox actually that kind of I see in the gay world, where people who get bullied a lot as kids and are sort of more effeminate as kids often grow up to be tougher in general, or they have horrible substance abuse problems and horrible issues with like their own self-worth. The ones who seem to almost always have more trouble that I find are the kids who are able to kind of fly under cover, right? They were more masculine presenting. They weren't as clockable as gay, but they were still internalizing all of the stuff around them and they weren't having to confront it. Both of these can lead to these situations where people have assumed so much sort of psychic damage that you then have to start paying back eventually. And I think that the advantage that ideally between a good parent who can keep you protected as long as they can and you having to confront sort of who you are in relation to the world, you can become a really tough person out of that. It can make you a really strong person. But if you're not careful, that psychic debt can build up to the point where, you're really deep in the hole with drugs or with alcohol or just very dysfunctional relationships or addictions. I feel like I'm not being super coherent here. It's always fascinating the way that gay kids absorb so much. And I know this isn't just gay kids. It happens to people of color. It happens to women. It happens to all sorts of people. You absorb so much and you aren't aware, I don't think, maybe in your 20s that you're going to have to pay that off at some point. But it was something I definitely started to notice in my 30s was I was like, I came out pretty okay, but I had friends who had deep substance abuse issues. And I was like, what's wrong? Like they didn't come from like the classical poor, impoverished family cycle of addictions thing. Like they were often like middle-class kids who just happened to be gay in the wrong place at the wrong time. And they were dealing either with like sex addictions, drug addictions, drinking problems, just really dysfunctional behavior, or just like a deep sort of immaturity, like not facing the world as adults. And I realized it's because we've all absorbed this stuff and you've got to pay it down at some point.
And I think for me, I've always conceptualized it as stuff that you're almost like in your 20s, you're like, oh, okay, I'm an adult now. So I'm going to rush out and do my adult thing. And now I'm, I have this autonomy and I can make all these decisions. And it's almost like we shove things in the closet because we're so focused on going forward, but we're still dragging all those chains behind us and they're stopping us from moving forward. So I think you're right. I think as we age, we start to look and realize that weight is pretty heavy back there. What the heck is behind me?
Yes, right? Exactly.
And sometimes, for as much as age puts wrinkles on us and other things, I think it can be helpful because it does force us to stop and look around.
Yeah, you can't go 1,000,000 miles an hour in your 30s, I find. You know what I mean? It's harder. Like the hangovers are worse. You get tired. And there's something really useful about I don't know, man. I feel like age, if you're doing it right, it seems to give you perspective. That's the best thing I've found about it so far. Like everything else sucks, but like that part is really nice.
The other thing I thought was so powerful about your characters was that you did not shy away from showing us some really difficult things in the human experience. And the way that you confronted them is one of many reasons why I see how highly acclaimed your work is. That unflinching look at humanity from so many perspectives and some of the darkest stuff. You lifted up some of the darkest, heaviest rocks and made us look under them. And that, as a reader, I'm so grateful for, because having us examine ourselves, that's how we grow. And you gave us so many opportunities to do that and to see some of the darkest people in so many ways and through so many prisms. Was that hard to do for you? Because that whole, writing comes from a place of empathy. Was it hard for you to go to some of those dark places?
It may have been at the time. I don't remember. It's weird. Whenever I'm writing a book, I'm so intensely into it. And then when it's done, it's like gone. Like literally last week when I was starting to do like press and stuff for this, I had to like grab the book off the shelf and flip through it because I had forgotten so much. So maybe it was difficult. I don't think so, though. I mean, for me, like there's this amazing quote from Eudora Welty where the interviewer is like, do you find it difficult to capture the human experience so well? And she goes, no, the hard part is getting people in and out of rooms. And she's right. Like, you know what I mean? Like, I think as a novelist, like if you're living the way an artist should live, which is with as much empathy as you can, even for people who really bewilder you, if you can turn that empathy toward the work, the characters are pretty easy. It's the logistics of plot that are hard. Right. It's getting all the pieces around the table and knowing who knew what when. That's the tricky part, I think. Where there's some scenes where I wanted to shower afterwards, yes. But I definitely felt more sympathy for these people more than I felt sort of, disgust.
And that was done so well because you made the reader have to see everyone. And I think sometimes that's the hardest thing for us as human beings. It's easy to judge people and put the label, you're the bad person. But it's much harder to look at them and say, why are they bad? Why are they doing what they're doing? And can I still find a place of humanity to relate to why they are who they are today?
It was really important to me with this book. And it's kind of a weird stylistic choice. Like some people have loved it and some people really don't. But in the third act, we shift out of Toby's perspective and we bounce between all of these different characters sort of in the throes of the climax of the book. And that was really important to me, partially because there's just certain information where the plot won't make sense if you don't know it, but Toby would never have the opportunity to learn it. And so I was okay. I was like, you've got to get this through somehow. But on a deeper level, not that my publisher ever wanted to cut it or anything, but it was something I was ready to fight for, because there are certain characters who do some really villainous stuff. They do some really heinous stuff. And it was, you probably know the character I'm talking about. It was really vital to me that that person be given, I think he gets like 20 pages. And he, at the end of the day, his was the one chapter that kind of made me cry, because I realized how, not that he's excused from his bad behavior, like everybody's responsible for what they do, but he came from such a horrible place and he never acknowledged it, really, even to himself. That's what got to me. And that was the part where I don't think the book would have worked if it was all Toby's perspective, because you have to see these people as people, or I did. And that was really fun to me, and really, that was where the catharsis of the book, I think, really kicked in, is when you can get out of this one point of view and really try to see how everybody is approaching this problem and the mess that their father or their grandfather got them into. You know what I mean?
And I thought that was such a powerful device, the changing of the POVs, the character POVs at the end, because like you said, when you're sticking with one and you're looking at it, not only are parts of the plot not available for you to see, but like you said, those insights into characters that sometimes only those characters themselves can give you are so very powerful. And to stand in people's shoes, even if it's uncomfortable, even if it's unpleasant, even if it hurts your soul, that was just so powerful. So thank you for that.
Thank you. Yeah, that was when I felt really sort of satisfied with the book, because I always knew it needed to come, and I was really apprehensive about it, because there's heavy stuff in there, and there's these people who are very tragic, and I was like, how do I do this? How do I make it exciting for the reader, because it is a whiplash thing to get pulled out of one person's perspective. So that took a lot of work on like a technical side, but also just, it's a weird example. I remember in 2016, after the election, I was not thrilled about the election results. And I was like, but I was seeing this sort of contempt and rage from the left about it. And I was like, I had just finished the draft of what was my first book. The Brightlands came a little bit later, but it was the first book that I had a full draft of. And I was finally taking myself seriously as an artist, really. I was like, okay, I can do this. And I remember very clearly thinking, like, my job in this is to expand my empathy. My job in this is to open myself up, because if I fall into this fear and rage, not that they aren't necessarily justified, but to exist in that space is not good for anything. And it's definitely not good for your art. And it's not what I think I come to when I look for a piece of fiction. So it was like, how can I expand my empathy as wide as possible, even to include these people like this president who I don't like and his supporters who do stuff I don't like? How can I expand this as wide as possible while still maintaining a sense of moral perspective? That became the challenge, I think.
Well, in expanding your empathy, you've expanded ours. So, it's kind of that charge that authors have somehow, somewhere in the universe, right? If you can see it in different ways than others can, it's kind of incumbent on you to take your flashlight and share it around so then others can see it too. And you just did that so incredibly powerful, and in such incredibly powerful ways, one after another. You talked about that change of POV at the end. The end is just, oh my God, is it just like your pulse is pumping and your breath is catching and everything's happening. And it's just the most amazing ending. It's so cinematic. But getting back real quick before I go to the ending, to one other piece that you mentioned, judgment. Toby is a very attractive guy. Luca's a very cute kid. His wife Alyssa is very attractive. There's all of these different folks in this compound who happen to be attractive people. Some of them, their inside matches their outside. Some are diametrically opposed. What is it in that juxtaposition play for you of here's something that should attract, but maybe what's inside repels?
That's interesting. I lived for a long time in New York City, and that was my first kind of encounter. So I lived in Austin for a bit, and there's definitely money there. But New York City was where I encountered like generational wealth, like people who had like long chains of money and trust funds and that kind of life. And I was amazed. I'd be at the bar and you would see this like gaggle of like 21-year-old kids who are like really fit. They have perfect skin, perfect teeth, great hair. And there's this sort of aura of like cosseted wealth, this sense that you're just cushioned your whole life. And that was fascinating to me. And then getting to know them, they're not all bad people, but there were moments where you would be talking to people and either through ignorance or deliberate malice, they would say just the most heinous shit. And you would just be like, just casually racist or casually, there's a huge, like gays have a lot of internalized homophobia in the same way a lot of minorities have against themselves, or just racism or misogyny or whatever. And I would be sort of stunned by that. And it could deepen into like more general cruelty. And that really fascinated me, that tension between like these people who have everything and they have really nothing to complain about. And they're so effing miserable, but they look great doing it, and I think the way I can summarize it, I had a friend who he wasn't a bad guy, but he had a lot of damage. He had a lot of that psychic debt that we were talking about. And there was one time he went away to a wedding, and I think for millennials, weddings are like it's like the runway. It's where you kind of are going to go and take all your best pictures, and you're expected to get your new profile pictures are going to come from a wedding and all of this. Like, he went away looking great, dressed really well. He had all the clothes. He had a really good job. He came from money, like the whole 9 yards. He's texting me these like frantic strings of text messages because this boy that he'd been crushing on really hard is kind of giving him the cold shoulder a little bit, and then texts him on the third day to say, hey, I'm going serious with somebody else. And my friend is just like losing his mind. Like, actually, like, I'm worried for him, like his mental state, because and I was like, you've known this boy for like a month. Like, that alone isn't very healthy. But B, like, you're really losing it. But what was so freaking crazy is his Instagram is just one amazing picture after another. Like, here he is at the beach with his shirt off looking perfect. Here he is in a tux. Here he is with all the best men. And he's just looking incredible and like the brightest smile and this perfect look. And when he calmed down a little bit, I was talking to him after he got back. And I was like, yeah, I was really surprised at that. Like, that seemed really weird. And he was like, oh yeah, I've always known I take my best selfies when I'm miserable. And I was just like, that tension is so profound to me. The way that you look your best when you're at your most unhappy, that really stuck with me. So I think a lot of that leached into the way the Wright family looks so good, but a lot of them are just rotten to the core.
There's inherent conflicts inside of us that we really don't always get to see unless we read books by empathetic authors who know how to share it. So thank you. Again, just coming back real quick to the ending. I will not give spoilers, but oh my gosh, you are phenomenal.
Thank you.
So good. That was so good. Were you catching your breath sometimes with it? Was it because it was it was like it was choreographed. It was so amazingly powerful and again, I don't want to give it away because it's so very cool. You seeded it so well throughout the novel that it might be going this way. And oh my gosh, how hard was that?
So for me, I think there's kind of two endings. There's kind of the action climax, and then there's the realization of what's really going on here. And those kind of flow one into the other. The action climax part very much was like, I grew up playing video games, and like I still love video games. And I think that one thing that games can give that do very well over fiction is this incredible sense of climax, especially these long like role-playing games. You've had a big story, and now you're fighting the last boss, which is usually like some kind of god or something like this incredibly epic scale. That always stuck with me as like the gold standard of like, it needs to feel epic and overwhelming and just completely overpowering. And also I love action movies. So like Mad Max Fury Road has that like perfectly choreographed, like every single thing fits together as fast as it can go. So I wanted to put as much of that in there. And also just like, you've got a large book with a bunch of characters. You want to give it needs to have a good send off. It can't just end, right? Like it can't just be, oh, we got in a car and drove off. It's got to have something really heavy to pull it all together and blow it all up. And that was really fun. And then the twist part, I had always wanted to write a book that flipped itself on its head with the very last line. I always wanted to pull that off because it's so hard to do. And that was, I mean, it's a nightmare in revision because you need to cut a chapter because it's too long. And then you're like, well, shoot, like, how am I going to get this information over here? And who knows what, when. But if you can thread that needle, it was amazing to have this complicated book all building up to one sentence. And that was just when I finally got to it, when I finally pulled it all together, yeah, that there's no feeling like it. There really isn't.
Well, I don't know how it felt to write it, but I know how it felt to read it. And it was so utterly satisfying. Like you said, there's the action sequence, there's the resolution of the mystery, there's the resolution of conflict between characters. All of it was just perfect symphony. So thank you.
Thank you.
Well, John, one last quick question. When you are not writing amazing books like this, what are you doing? What do you like to do to have fun?
What's fun? I feel like I'm always working. No, I love it. I'm one of those people who writes every day, by and large. Like I'll take like Sunday off, but I'm generally always working on something. And that is fun for me. I think as like a hobby, I do play a lot of video games still. I still really enjoy them. I think that there's still so much that fiction can teach us, that it can teach fiction about pleasure and narrative and stuff. Obviously, I love to read, go to the movies. I live in Waco, Texas, man. It's a pretty chill town. So it's like, just try to go out, see my friends, recuperate. I feel like writing is sort of a full court press for me. I really love it, but it's definitely a contact sport. So I am really discovering in my 30s the pleasure of just sitting on a couch and having no obligations. It's taken me a long time to get there. But at this moment, that's my favorite hobby.
Well, I am so glad that you do have time to recharge so that you can come back at it, because I absolutely cannot wait to read the next John Fram book. So thank you for writing this. Now, for existing fans of yours and for future fans of yours, where is the best place for people to find you and know what's going on, where you're going to be, and what's coming up?
So the best place to find me for kind of just day-to-day updates is going to be on Instagram. I'm john.fram. You can check out my website, johnfram.com. I've recently had it redone, and it's great and fun, which is nice because it looked terrible at first. So now it's like somewhere I can actually update it more frequently. And then I actually just started a horror newsletter, a Substack, called Why Is This So Scary? That actually went live today. So you can subscribe to that. It's bi-weekly deep dives into my favorite horror pieces, books, movies, games, everything. And I'll also have including there news updates, book updates, appearances. And if you're in the state of Texas, I'm going to be touring Texas the 22nd through the 27th. So stop by Houston, Austin, or Waco, and you can come see me.
Awesome. And I think most important of all is get out and get No Road Home by John Fram. You will have, there is no video game that compares.
Thank you. That's very high praise.
It is phenomenal. Thank you, John, so much for joining me. Thank you for writing this tremendous, tremendous work of art.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me. This was a great time.
And thank you all for joining us on this episode of Twisted Passages. We hope to see you next time.